is because India's demographics are enormously beneficial. This chart shows the dependency ratio of various countries around the world, and the dependency ratio is the proportion of the proportion of the population outside the working age group relative to the proportion of the population in the working age group. As the dependency ratio falls, the national savings rate rises, and that boosts the investment to GDP ratio. And if investment rises as a percent of GDP, that should typically mean that you get a boost to productivity. And stronger productivity growth is, of course, the ultimate guarantor of prosperity. That is the sort of benefit that Korea began to experience around 1965. All the way from there, the dependency ratio declined all the way down to about 2010. And in China, it began to happen in 1978 or so, and continued until last year. From this year onwards, China's dependency ratio starts to rise. Korea's began to rise about 2 or 3 years ago. Japan's began to rise in 1990. India's dependency ratio is going to be declining for another 25 years. So during that period, the savings rate should be rising, the investment to GDP ratio should be picking up, and the economy should be accelerating substantially further, which was what was happening until about 3 years ago. But the economic slowdown that has now occurred over the last 2 years is a very serious challenge, and it is something that requires aggressive action. To some degree, this government began to take some of those actions. I would credit the next speaker, the speaker after next, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, with a great deal of credit for reigniting the process of economic reform in India. Soon after he took office as Chief Economic Advisor, you began to see a whole spate of economic reforms. India raised fuel prices and opened up several sectors to foreign direct investment. In particular, multi-brand retail, aviation, insurance, etc. So with that, there was a new burst of economic reform, coupled with the fact that oil prices were raised, thereby reducing the subsidy bill, which would have an impact in the current fiscal year, but also in the next fiscal year. So those reforms, I think, do help at least to check the deceleration in economic activity, but they probably are not enough to get India back up to the 9 to 10% growth path immediately. So we probably have to depend on next year's election to bring about the changes needed to really get growth going again. As I said, given the demographics only come once. This sort of demographic dividend is not going to be repeated. So India has another 20 years to benefit from this demographic dividend. This is an opportunity not to be missed. Unfortunately, the last 2 or 3 years have been rather bad on that front. Now, one very important aspect of why the fiscal situation is this dire is because this government has gone on a spending spree. Normally, I'm a real bull on India. I've been a lifelong bull on the Indian economy, so it's a bit painful to be standing here talking about all that has gone wrong. Unfortunately, much has gone wrong. So there's no getting away from the fact that much has gone wrong in the last 2 or 3 years. In particular, there's been a burst of popular spending on something called the NREGA, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, that is one major cause of the deterioration of the fiscal balance. Second, of course, the government was quite slow with subsidy reform. There has certainly been significant progress on that front. This year's budget includes a provision of 10,000 crores, or about 100 billion rupees, for something called the Food Security Bill. I would say that this is the thin end of the wedge, or the small part of the iceberg that you can see above the surface. Below the surface, there's lots of ice. So this is the thing that can sink the Titanic of India's fiscal position. Only a provision of 100 billion rupees for the food security bill. Most estimates are that to really fund the food security bill, you need about 5 times that even in the first year, and probably a lot more in subsequent years. So I'd say this item, the 100 billion rupee provision for the food security bill, is the real issue and question that we'll have to address to the eminent Dr. Raghuram Rajan when he comes on. The government, of course, is going for a fairly ambitious program of disinvestment. This finance minister has been a little more aggressive with that, but this year's disinvestment target will be missed, and next year's will be quite difficult to achieve. But the point is that disinvestment is another aspect that this government wants to do quite a bit of. Also, I think the government, towards the end of the fiscal year, may require the public enterprises to pay larger dividends to the government, and that too will provide a basis for stronger